Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Pranita. My interest in reading and promoting books that are hidden gems of the internet has led me to Nanda Sach's debut author. She is an indie author from Georgia. She's a composition teacher by day and a fantasy author by night. Today, I have with me the author of the Elfina Chronicles, Haley Hamilton. Welcome, ma'am. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with me.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
So, before we get into the specifics, tell us a bit about yourself.
Like you mentioned, I teach at a university. I teach freshman composition, which I love. I think it's a really fun age group to teach. I teach college freshmen how to write. Um, and I have 4 kids, so I'm very busy all the time. And I have been kind of writing in my spare time. Um, I have a degree in professional writing, a degree in teaching, and a degree in English, but I have never taken a creative writing course. So this book kind of came out of left field for me. I never thought that I would be a fantasy writer, but here I am.
That's great. Your book was released in June this year. How's it going so far?
So it's going so much better than I thought it would. I think the scariest part about, putting something out there that you've produced, written creatively, is that, is how it will be received. And so far, I've had just such an overwhelming amount of positive feedback, and encouragement and kindness from people in the book community. So it's been a really, really, really interesting and kind of uh, new experience that I really had no idea what was going to happen. So it's been overwhelmingly positive though.
I haven't read your book yet, but I read the blurb of your book, and I think I love the setting of it, especially how it is inspired by the fairy folklore. What trigged you into the idea of the book and moreover writing it as well?
Yeah, so the idea for this book actually, well, let me start over. So I was working on my master's in professional writing. So I was doing a lot of research at the time. And we were getting ready to go on a trip to Scotland to visit my husband's family. They still all live there. He's from there. So we try to take a trip once a year to go see them. And because I just have always been a researcher, I just started researching Scottish folklore, fairy lore, the witch trials, like all sorts of, all things Scottish, basically. Um, and once we actually got there, I was like, you know what? I think there could be magic here. Like this is just a magical place, like if the fairies were anywhere, they would be here. And a lot of the lore in Scottish folklore is basically, it wasn't a question of whether the fairies were real, it was where did they go. So it was just very kind of embedded into the culture. Even when I was studying the witch trials in Scotland, they used to use fairy involvement as alibis, and they were frequently acquitted, like in legal court documents, because of the fairy involvement. So that's how real it was. Um, so I started to ask, what if the fairies are real and we just can't find them? And it just, once we got back from Scotland, this whole story started unfold in my head. And I told my husband, I was like, I think I'm going to write a book. And he was like, okay. I mean, you read enough of them, like I've always been a very avid reader. I love fantasy. But I just never would have thought that I would have written a book. And so I started just writing the story down, and I wrote it in a little under 3 months, which I'm learning now writing the second book is very fast. So the second book is it's been a lot more like pulling teeth, but the first book, it just flowed. It was like I was a vessel for the story. So very,
Wow,
very cool experience.
that's pretty great, actually. I think I would like to tune this interview more towards the aspects of writing one's first book. And since you have recently done, I think your journey and your experience would help a lot more other people out there. So, firstly, I would ask, tell us about the whole journey for writing, especially from, it's not easy to write, just take a pen and write the book, especially I would think that. So, what was the journey in that?
Yeah. So So again, I am a writing teacher, so I know kind of the structural components of writing. I know how to draft, I know how to edit, I know how to revise, I know how to come up with ideas and then make them more specific. But like I said, I had never taken a creative writing course. That wasn't my specialty. I was in the rhetoric and composition side of that degree. But I have read a lot of books. And one of the things as I was writing my first book, and as I was getting to know more people in the writing community, specifically in fiction writing, um, I truly my biggest piece of advice would be to just read, 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 because you start to learn, how dialogue works, how plots work, how the flow of a story works, pacing. Like you learn all of that very naturally through reading. So that's always, when people ask me, they're like, what can I do to really help my writing improve? Of course, you can learn from other writers, you can go to conferences, you can go to classes, but my biggest advice is to read, especially in your genre, because that's going to really, give you kind of a mold for how storytelling works, because that's really what you're doing is you're telling a story.
Creates a
Um,
base for you.
Sorry, say that again.
Reading creates a base for you, right? Like for writing,
Yes.
especially.
Yes, exactly. It does. It creates a base. All of the tropes that we love are tropes for a reason because they exist in books in different ways. So it has to do with kind of a reader expectation and then you as a writer being to execute that. For my process for writing my first book, like I said, it started out kind of as like let's see if I can do this. Like I was never intending to publish. And then I actually wrote the book and gave it to people who um, are in the writing community, and they were like, "No, this is actually like this is good." And I was like, "Okay, that was kind of like I'm surprised to hear that." Like I really didn't anticipate that being the response. And then I started a Bookstagram account, which was very stressful at first because I had no idea what I was doing. And posting was very stressful. But what it did was it gave me a base of a writing community and kind of a bookish community that I hadn't had before. And that really helped with like spurring me on to start querying, which I decided to do. I was like, I'm not going to do this for a living. So I'm just going to spend some time querying agents to publish my book. However, because I'm not doing this like as my career, I was like, you know what? I am wasting a lot of time, money, and like mental energy querying when I could just publish it and see what happens. And I'm kind of I'm very black and white in my personality. Like I do not live in a gray area. So when I decided to stop querying, I immediately announced that I was self-publishing. Like there was no in between for me, which I don't know if I recommend doing, but I just was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And so I found a cover designer and I decided to do special editions as a pre-order, which was a horrible idea. Like that's one of my biggest pieces. I'm like, don't start with that. That was so much work, so much like fulfillment. But it ended up being really cool because I sold like, I think 150 special editions, like right off the bat, which I was again shocked by. But it was the whole process of it was almost this like, let's just see what happens next. Let's see what happens if I do this. Let's see what happens if I give this to beta readers. Let's see what happens if I hire an editor. Like it was just kind of this, let's, find out.
Let's try it out.
Um, so it was, again, not a linear process by any means, but I did learn a lot very quickly. And again, I'm kind of a researcher by trade. So I just treated publishing a book as a research project, which ended up being really great.
Listening to you, I feel like your life can be taken as a complete movie, especially after writing this book. You go to Scotland and you write this book. It's like really great to even hear it. I think it would be so better to experience it for you. But since you got the idea at the Scotland, did you have a complete idea of the book? Like you had the outline of the structure completely in your head, first of all? Like, did you plan that? Did you plan it out?
So there are two camps of writers. One are plotters and one are what are called pantsers, where you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. I'm definitely a pantser. I had no idea. I did not have an outline. I had about 3 or 4 really specific scenes that had happened in my head. One of them was the very last chapter of the book. One of them was a scene towards the end of the book, and then 2 of them were scenes towards the beginning of the book. But other than that, I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen. But at the time, so again, another part of this that was really, really cool was, like I said, I'm a researcher. So when I started doing all this research for the Scottish folklore, what kept popping up were all of these Scottish ballads. And they were basically, storytelling has always existed. But for the most part of human history, it was done verbally. Stories were shared by, families, by clans over the fire, in song. And so I started researching a lot of these ballads. Because I can't do, again, because I'm very black and white and I can't do anything halfway, a lot of these ballads were written in very kind of old Scots. So they're very difficult to understand to a kind of American English like reader. So I started to kind of transcribe them. And, I'm like texting my mother-in-law, like, what is this word? And she's like, you need a dictionary. I was like, okay. So I got like a Doric to English dictionary and I'm like transcribing these ballads. And that was one of the things that inspired the story as well, is Elliday and Aelia, the main characters in the book. Elliday is a fairy researcher. Like, she has researched fairy lore. She's transcribed these ballads, where I got this idea. And then Aelia has researched the witches. She's more so researched the occult side. So Elliday basically disappears into the fairy realm in the first chapter. And Aelia is like, okay, well, I have to go find her. So she uses all of Elliday's notes to go look for where these entrances to Elflane could be. And all of the places that they travel to are real places where the fairy ballads actually take place. And in the book, I included my transcriptions of the real fairy ballads. So it is, in terms of your question of like how all the Scottish stuff, how it worked, it is set in a way that you could actually travel to the places that they go to in the book. And again, all of the lore is from the actual places where the lore was, written and shared. So the first place that they go is Earlston, which is where Thomas Rhymer is from. It's a very, very famous fairy ballad, Thomas Rhymer and the Fairy Queen. And again, they're going to all these places. There's a stone there that's actually there, where there's an inscription, and all of that's in the book. So it's a little bit historical almost. It was funny when I was pitching this to literary agents. I went to a couple of virtual conferences and they were like, so is it historical fiction? I was like, no, it's definitely firmly fantasy. However, it does have a fairly, rich historical foundation, which I think makes it a little bit different than a lot of the high fantasy books that you read.
That's pretty great. I have heard that one of the crucial things where an author struggles is with the bringing characters to life and also character development as well. So was it the same for you in the book?
So, I think so. I had these ideas for characters in my head. It's funny because the original main characters that I had envisioned were Aelia and Elliday, the 2 sisters, loosely based off of me and my sister. And I say loosely based because it's just the fact that we're sisters. And then the other character that I had in my head right away was Callum, who is the Fey warrior from the blurb. I actually, the first 10 chapters, I think I rewrote probably 10 to 15 times. And I'm talking like from scratch. It was funny because in the very, very early versions of the draft, Reed, who is a main character in the book, did not exist. And then it was like, I started over again with the first 5 chapters. I was like, okay, this still isn't this still isn't right. Like the journey has not started the right way. So I started over, and all of a sudden, Reed popped up. And I was like, who is this guy? Like, I don't know who he is, you know? And I'm like writing it, and I'm like, oh, he's like great, but also kind of annoying. So like the characters like really kind of developed again very much so organically on their own as I was writing. I did end up doing a lot of like I have so many notes in the manuscript that I wrote, just basically like chapters that didn't make it into the book of the history of Alia and Elliday, like who they are, what they were before the book started, things that they did. Because again, I was kind of trying to get to know them as I was writing the book. So there's a lot of background information, and you actually get a lot of that information in the second book. So a lot of these chapters that I kind of wrote as background information for Elliday, Alia, Callum, Reed, the Fairy Queen, like all of these kinds of, you know, draft ideas that I had are sprinkled in the second book, which has been really interesting because I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I'm like, is it a dream? Is it a memory? Is it a flashback? Like, how do I, you know, like share these parts of them without it coming across as like info dumping? So the characters definitely developed. They started off again, like I had this idea, but they for sure took off on their own. And some of the, especially when I would, you know, have a couple of hours to write, which is very rare for me because of all my children. Some of the things that they would do, I would get to the end of a writing session where I wrote like 5 to 10,000 words, and I would be like, what? Like, what just happened? Like, are you guys for real? You know, like they would just do stuff where I was like, you can't do that. Like, that's not okay. So it was very, very interesting how the story developed as I was writing it.
I feel like you really enjoyed your way into the writing as well.
Yes.
Especially, it sounds so. I think like roller coaster runners, roller coaster doesn't even listen to it.
Yes.
So
Oh, for sure.
what was the biggest mistake you made in your writing journey? How did you overcome that?
So the biggest mistake that I made for sure was giving early drafts to readers before they were ready. Um, I was, especially when I decided that I was gonna like really write a book. Like I had given drafts to my sister, like, look at this that I started a fantasy book. How weird is this? But when I actually started giving it to other readers, I wish that I had waited off because I ended up taking feedback probably too seriously. That would be one of my biggest cautions to new writers is keep the drafts to yourself as long as you can. Go through them 3 or 4 times, maybe with one other person, but really kind of keep it to yourself and keeping in mind that when you're getting feedback from other people, it's just one person's opinion. And you're not writing a book for just one person. So I think that that was definitely the biggest mistake that I made early on. And it's something that in my second book, I've been like, okay, I really want to send, you know, these chapters to my alpha readers. And then I'm like, no, let me sit on them for a couple of days. Let me go through and revise them. Let me reread them. So it's something that I have worked on in my second draft of keeping it to myself and making sure that it's really the story that I want to tell. Because once you put it out there and you start getting feedback, it really changes your whole writing process because you're like, oh, yeah, that does make sense. Why did they go into the forest when they could have just driven to the city? You know, like you start questioning yourself. So I definitely think that that was the biggest mistake that I made that I'm trying not to repeat in my second book is keeping feedback out of it while you're still in a very early first draft.
I think that'll really help a lot of people out there. Especially, I think whenever you write something, we want to show it to someone, like see if it's okay or not. And then they give a bad review with someone, we feel very bad about it immediately. So I think that's really great. How has becoming a published author changed your life? What were the works and challenges for you?
So It's changed really the way that I, one, view books. Being kind of behind the scenes of the writing process, I think that I have a lot more kind of sympathy and empathy for authors now, where I'm like, like I think that people can be very critical of stories, of characters, of writing styles. And I think that one of the things that I've learned being on the other side of it is, as an author, I'm not writing to every reader's preference. I'm telling a story that I want to tell. And if it resonates with some people, then that's great. And if it doesn't resonate with other people, that's okay too. Like your book isn't for everyone. Um, I've also, probably the biggest thing that's changed, well, two things. One, I think that it's been really cool for my kids to see. Like, I'm 33 and I never thought I was going to write a book. And then all of a sudden, I'm a published author, and like we go to our local bookstore, and my book is on the shelves. So I think it's been really cool for them to see, like, you can have this kind of far-fetched like dream, and if you try hard enough, you can do it. There's really not a whole lot stopping you from just doing it. So I would say that's a really big thing that's changed. But another thing that's really changed for me is my perspective on like costs for books. So I was always, like, "Ugh, I really don't want to buy that book because it's $12 and I only want to spend
I can
10, or you know
relate
what I mean?
completely. Yes,
That was
definitely.
just my perspective, because I wanted to have as many books as possible as a reader. And now as a writer, I'm like, I truly don't know if I will ever break even from the cost of producing my book myself. Like, it is so expensive. And truly, like, I don't think that I have broken even from it, because if you're going to do it the right way, if you're going to hire a professional cover designer, if you're going to hire a professional editor, if you're going to have the formatting done correctly, um, and you're going to put in so much time and money to, marketing your book, it costs a lot of money. It's very expensive. And, for selling my books through something like Amazon, I'm making less than $2, sometimes less than $1 per book, which is not a lot of money. Like, it costs a lot of money to be an author. And it is definitely one of those things, if you're self-publishing, and this is something that I've talked to other authors about, if you're going to self-publish, you need to start saving the money so that you can invest it into your book, because the worst thing is when you have a really good story, but it's not been edited. The cover is kind of lackluster. And again, it's very expensive to do these things, so I get it. But you're not giving your book the best chance that it has, if you're not investing that time and money into it. And I always say, I'm friends with a lot of editors. And again, and I always tell people this, I'm like, I have 3 degrees in English, and one of them is professional writing. And I still would not edit my own book. Like, I still am going to pay someone to professionally edit my book, because I can't do it. Because I'm not an editor, I'm a writer. So that's definitely something, just learning about all of the kind of insides outs of this world, has been hugely eye-opening to me in terms of the effort and money and time and expertise that goes into producing a book.
What are your future plans? Are you working on a sequel or a new story?
So I am currently working on the sequel to the first book. It's called The Elfling Chronicles: Song of Starlight, and I'm about halfway through. I had horrible writer's block for about a month, and then out of nowhere, like literally, I was drafting and like reading some old fairy tales, and then all of a sudden it just clicked into place. And again, it was one of those days where I just wrote whatever 6 chapters. And I'd been writing like 200 to 300 words a day for like months at a time, because I just had horrible writer's block. So right now I'm working on that. I'm halfway through. It's going to be probably around, I think, 450 pages. I'm like at about 211, I think. So I'm halfway there, which has been a relief. And that should be, I'm hoping to be able to release it in March of next year. But I haven't picked out a firm publishing date yet because I don't want to, once I pick out a date, I'm like, I'm going to have to make it happen.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to push back. So I'm saying Marchish, but we'll see how that goes. And then I also have, so I have a prequel to this series that I want to write, and it's a standalone, probably like it's a little bit darker. And it's about the Fairy Queen. And then I also have a planned spin-off series of the Elfling Chronicles that I think is going to be, it's like a campus academy series. And that's all I'm going to say about it because I think it's going to be really, really cool, which I'm really excited
sounds really interesting, to be fair.
Yeah.
Lastly, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to authors that no one will?
So my biggest advice, and I don't know if this is something that no one would say, but my biggest advice, and this is what I tell my students, is to just write. To just write, get rid of the blank page. That's the worst part. Even if you're writing absolute nonsense, don't let a blank page sit in front of you because it is a huge barrier to creative writing and to any sort of writing. For my college students, I have them do timed writing where I'll give them a prompt. So I'll say like, society would really benefit from, and that's all I give them. But the one rule, and I give them 1 minute and I time it like on a timer. And my one rule is I'm like, you cannot stop writing. Like, even if you're writing, I don't know what to write next. This is so stupid. I hate writing. I hate this assignment. Like, I don't know what society needs. Even if that's what you're writing, you have to write for 1 minute. And that's the biggest advice that I give people. So I'm like, if you're stuck, give yourself a prompt and time yourself and just write. Because 9 times out of 10, you'll end up with a paragraph. And some of it's absolute like nonsense, but it at least gets you writing. And I also think, and this may be not necessarily controversial, but I think that this is something that writers need to hear, is you're never done. I could have edited and kept writing my first book for years. Like, I still will read portions of it where I'm like, that's a horrible paragraph. I should have never published this book. But you can get so stuck in an editing and rewriting and feedback loop, and it's horrible to the creative process. At some point, you just have to stop and say, like, at the point where you're like, I could see this on a shelf, you need to stop. Because otherwise you're just going to keep editing and rewriting. Like, I finally, it was funny because my editor, who I love, she was like, okay, like, we had gotten past the alpha reading, past the line editing. And she was like, okay, it's time for me to do proofreading. And after I'm done proofreading, you can't go back and make changes because then we have to do proofreading all over again. And I was like, no, like, this is it, you know, like, I can't go back and do anything more. But I think that you have to have that final point of like, okay, it's done. Because otherwise you're just going to keep rewriting and editing and revising and asking for feedback forever. So that would be my one piece of advice, is decide when you're going to stop and let yourself have a final draft. Otherwise it's never going to happen and you'll just keep rewriting forever.
I think your advice in a journey will inspire many people out there. I personally loved your journey. I think it was really great to just hear all the roller coaster that you've been through. It's really, I don't know, it's like I'm just imagining it in my head and it sounds so good. It's been a real trip talking to you, ma'am. I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. For people who are watching, do check it out, The Elflane of Chronicles, Ballad of Dawn. I'll drop the link in the description. Read it, review it, and let me know in the comments. And follow for Moses' content. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was so great. I love talking with you.
Thank you.